Member Lorge, and Member Erickson,
Here.
and President Bain.
Here, and I'll note that Member Lorge just joined us as well.
Okay.
I'd ask everybody to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd like to rise, rise when you do so. And if you want to shut off your camera, you can do in the bottom left of your Zoom tray. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members of the EDA, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Member Finneman and a second from Member Lorge. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Huntosh,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye, and our agenda is approved. Next item on the agenda this evening is to approve the minutes from the regular meeting December 14th, 2020. I will entertain a motion or any changes. Go ahead, Member Finneman.
I have no challenge to the minutes at all. I just would like to see us have a quick conversation about where the Castlewood funds ended up and if there's been any response to working with Max Stevens on his ideas and his proposal.
Very good. I think we have an opportunity to provide an update over agenda item 9, city update. And so we can make that part of the discussion tonight.
Okay. Move to approve the minutes.
And
There's
I'll second.
a motion from Member Finneman and a second from Member Huntosh. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Huntosh,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye, minutes approved. Next item on the agenda, the 2021 Washington County Local Business Relief Grant Program. Dan and Chris, do you want to, I'm not sure, Dan, if you're going to start, if we're going to jump right to Chris.
I'll
Go
defer
ahead.
this one to Chris. So
Excellent.
Chris, I'll get your slideshow up here just 1 second.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Glad you're here.
Thank you, members, for allowing me to join you this evening and give you kind of a quick update on the new county grant program. I think I might have mentioned in December that the state legislature had just approved a new round of funding for businesses that were impacted by Executive Order 99 and all of the executive orders that are were issued throughout the last year or so now with the pandemic. And so I wanted to kind of walk through the different funding pools and let you know how the county is administering these grant dollars, and certainly have some time at the end for questions if there are any. So just from a very high level, there are 3 buckets of money that were included in the legislation. The first bucket is money that will be administered directly by the Department of Revenue. And so if you're a business that is currently or previously until today closed partially or fully as a result of Executive Order 99, and you had revenues in 2019 that were within certain criteria, you were going to get a check directly from the Department of Revenue. And so those checks, I think, are going out this week. So if you know of any business that is anticipating those dollars, it should be coming this week. I know that there was some hope that the Department of Revenue would have those dollars out at the end of December, but they ran into a little bit of a delay in getting those dollars out. So they should be coming starting this week. And then those are specifically for restaurants, bars, breweries, gyms, fitness centers, distilleries, those types of businesses that are what you might consider public-facing businesses, and where people would gather for a meal. The second bucket of money is actually administered by the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And that will be a grant that you do have to apply for. And those are for specifically for movie theaters and for convention centers, only those two categories. The third bucket of money that the legislature allocated dollars for was for the counties. And it was basically to pick up those that fell through the cracks that didn't qualify for the first two programs or didn't get any money previously for any business assistance grants. The legislature wanted the counties to be able to get the dollars out quickly into the hands of businesses that needed it. And so last Tuesday at the county board meeting, the county board approved these policies that I'm going to walk through today and kind of give you an overview of the grant program. So Dan, if you could advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so the county board received $5 million for business grants. And the intent of the program, as I mentioned earlier, is to basically assist those businesses that were impacted by an executive order, primarily for Executive Order 99, which is the most recent, where businesses in November, if you remember, were asked to close either fully or partially. And today there's good news that they're partially back open again now. So, but there was some need for, and still is some need to help those businesses that lost revenues as a result of Executive Order 99. And so the county board created the program and the applications opened for that grant program on Thursday of last week. So on January 7th at 8 a.m., we started taking applications. And I just checked with Tyler from the Open to Business program, and we received 277 applications so far to today. And the applications are all done online through the CDA's Economic Development website. It's an online application through Submittable, which is a pretty easy application to fill out. And that's the link below if you wanted to forward that or send it to folks that are interested in applying. We do have about $5 million, and I suspect that we're about halfway through that right now as of today. And that, again, opened on Thursday last week. Dan, next slide, please. Before I jump into the program that I want to talk about for the most part tonight, there is also a little pool of money that the county board did set aside specifically for license fees. The county does have a license fee for certain businesses for hotels, restaurants, bars, and pools particularly. And if you have submitted a license fee to the county, I think they're due in November for the next year. So if you had a 2021 license fee that you paid to the county, you're going to get a grant in that same amount back. So you'll get just a check in the mail. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to apply for it. But the license fee that the county collected in November for 2021 will be coming back to those businesses that paid that fee. And we think that's about 700, maybe $600,000 to $700,000 in fees that will be granted back from this pool of money. The next program that I'll talk about is actually the actual grant that we're accepting applications for right now online. And we did categorize these into priorities. And so the first priority is for those restaurants and bars and gyms and fitness centers and those types of businesses that I mentioned earlier that were either fully or partially closed by Executive Order 99. They're going to get the first priority. So we're going to put that into a bucket and fund those businesses as the applications come in. And so of the 277 that I mentioned, I think 137 of them would fit into that first category. The second priority will be for nonprofits and for other businesses that are impacted by any executive order throughout the pandemic. And so if you're another business that didn't qualify or didn't meet the needs, you weren't exactly closed partially or fully by Executive Order 99, but you still had an impact as a result of the pandemic, you can still apply for $50,000, but we won't start funding those until February 4th, probably is when we're going to start moving down the list of priorities. Same with nonprofits. If you're a nonprofit organization, you can apply for up to $10,000, and you have to show that you were impacted by an executive order in the pandemic. And it's not hard to do, of course. There's a lot of businesses and nonprofits that are still hurting and still struggling and still trying to get back on their feet again. And these grant dollars are really intended to get those businesses some help. And we know that it's not enough. And we know that there's a need for more, but we think this is a good start and a good way to prioritize the dollars to get them into the hands of those businesses and nonprofits as soon as we can. And the last priority is for non-employer businesses or home-based businesses, and those businesses can apply for up to $7,500. This is a grant, so it doesn't have to be paid back. Kind of in a way, without a lot of the complications. In a way, it's very similar to the CARES Act dollars. It's just a lot easier to administer because the CARES Act dollars had certain requirements that the state did not put on these programs. They wanted this to be able to help use these funds as a safety net or a catch net for those businesses that didn't qualify for previous dollars. Dan, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Executive Order 2099 businesses are restaurants, food courts, cafes, coffee houses, bars, taverns, restaurants, breweries, distilleries, dining clubs, those type of things. Also includes gymnasium, fitness centers, recreation centers, indoor sports facilities, climbing facilities, and you can see the list goes on, dance and exercise studios. It also included outdoor events such as racetracks and mini go-karts and other festivals and fairs as well. So those businesses that are in that category that were directly impacted by Executive Order 2099 are going to be the first priority. We will put those grant applications into that bucket and fund them as soon as the applications come in. Now, I do want to point out that if we do get to a point where we're oversubscribed for that first priority, there is a good chance that we might not get to the second and third and fourth priority. So just want to make sure that people know that you should not wait. We want to accept the applications as quickly as we can get them in and fund those as quickly as they can get them in. But there is a possibility that we'll go through those dollars. The $5 million, as I mentioned, for the county doesn't go very far. And we know there's a lot more need out there. But we did feel that this was a good place to start for the priority. So once the $5 million is gone, the money's gone. It really is. There is not much we can do. So if you know of anybody that would fit into these categories that are listed here, please encourage them to apply as quickly as possible. Okay, Dan, next slide, please. So the other eligible businesses that I talked about in the second category are basically a regular business. I would have a hard time finding, there might be a few businesses that didn't have some kind of impact this year related to COVID, but very few. I think that most businesses had some impact and would probably be eligible for that second category of businesses. So the $15,000, but again, this would be the second priority, not the bars, restaurants, and fitness centers that were ordered to close in November. And then, as part of the application process, we do say that they have to certify that they incurred costs just to show that they are related to business operations. And we'll talk a little bit about the things that you can use the dollars for in just a bit. Dan, next slide, please. Eligibility requirements, they have to be locally owned and operated. And what we mean by that is it can't be a corporate chain. So if it's a McDonald's or a Burger King or something that's owned by a corporate entity out of state, we're not going to fund those types of businesses. It has to be locally owned and operated. It has to be located physically in Washington County. It has to have fewer than 75 full-time equivalent employees. So those are including part-time as well. So it has to have less than 5 million in revenue. It has to be financially impacted by COVID-19. And it had to be in business prior to November 1st of 2020. Now that's new. That was never in place when we first started with the CARES Act dollars. We didn't have that option. We had to show by federal law that the business had year-over-year losses, that it was not required by the state of Minnesota. And so we can pick up an additional handful of businesses that weren't eligible for CARES Act dollars using these state grants. And those businesses that might not even get that money from the Department of Revenue can certainly qualify. And we would encourage them to apply for this county grant. They have to certify that they had a hardship. And again, that's not hard to do with COVID-19. All businesses at some point in time have been impacted, with the exception, I think there's probably some liquor stores and grocery stores maybe that did quite well during this pandemic. But for a lot of the other restaurants, we certainly saw a lot of hardship out there, and we still do. And they have to be in good standing and have no existing tax liens as on record with the Secretary of State. And so we will go back and check and make sure that they don't owe taxes or have a tax lien on record with the state of Minnesota. Next slide, please. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, it can't be a corporate-owned chain. We won't fund Walmarts or McDonald's, Burger Kings, those types of corporate-owned restaurants. However, if it is a locally owned franchise, I like to use Dairy Queen or Subway, for example, where somebody might own a franchise, those are okay. We'll fund those types of businesses as long as it's not part of a corporate-owned chain and we're not funding the corporation. And we'll also have a caveat that we excluded businesses that are gambling, adult entertainment, pawn merchandise, guns, passive investments, real estate transactions, billboards, or lobbying. Next slide, please. Here's what we say the funds can be used for. Now, this is new. In the CARES Act, we did not allow payroll expenses because it was just on top of the payroll protection program. But in this program through the state of Minnesota, we can fund payroll expenses. So that is something new from the CARES Act. We can also fund rent and mortgage payments. We can fund payments to suppliers, insurance, utility expenses, or other critical expenses, including reopening and closing again. I want to make clear that if you are a business that's received funds in the past from CARES, you can reapply for these funds, but you cannot use the dollars for the same activity. So for example, if you received a county or a city CARES grant from the previous funding back in December, and you paid for March, April, and May rent, you can certainly pay for June, July, August rent, but you can't pay for the rent that somebody else covered. So we want to make sure that the dollars are used for other expenses, but kind of still in the same category. Dan, next slide, please. So I mentioned that the applications opened last Thursday, January 7th. We do expect that we'll close the application process on February 4th, and we'll continue to process them as we come in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you're a second or third category or priority or fourth priority, you're going to have to wait probably until February 4th to get your money. We want to make sure those businesses that are in that top category get their funding first, and we are processing those as we get them in. But again, if we have money left over and we don't go through it all for that first priority, we will fund second and third priority businesses. It's just a matter of waiting a little bit longer. The review process, I talked a little bit about that, and we're funding them as we get them in. Notifications, we're going to let folks know as soon as you get them in, and you probably will get some kind of an email notification when you fill out the application, and there's certainly ways to check on your application as well. And then by state law, we have to have the funds out the door by March 15th, no exceptions. And so we actually anticipate having them out in February, no later than February, and the program will be officially closed by March 1st. Next slide, please. And so we're very fortunate again to have Tyler Hilsebeck with the Open to Business program working with us. And Tyler and his team have done a great job in helping us get these dollars out. And I also want to thank Nanette and the chambers from around the county and the county board as well. This is not easy to do, and we sure appreciate the hard work that Nanette and her team and Tyler and his team are helping out with. But the goal is to move these dollars quickly. And as you saw in the last slide, we don't have a lot of time to get these dollars out, and we don't want to wait. So the quicker we get them out, the better. And we're moving really quick. So with that, I'm going to pause and certainly feel free to ask any questions. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Members of the EDA, what questions do you have for Chris this evening? Questions or comments? It was a very thorough review, so thank you for all of the detail. Member Finneman, go ahead.
Is the outreach to notify businesses pretty much just the same it was last time? Through the chamber, through the city website, through the county, or through Open to Business? Are we reaching out in any other fashion, short of what EDA members can do to reach forward to other businesses?
Yeah, President Bain and members, Commissioner Finneman, great question. And I do want to, again, thank Nanette. We've done, I think, 2 webinars so far through the chamber and the social media, and the emails that the chamber is sending out are very, very helpful. I do expect that the money will go quickly. And I think, Dan, I want to thank you as well. I think it's on the city's website as well. And so any social media publicity that you might be able to provide would be very appreciated as well. On the county's website, the CDA's website, word of mouth. Tyler has a long list of business clients, and so he sent his business clients all of the information. And those folks that have received CARES Act dollars, they're on the list as well. So we want to make sure that they know that they can reapply. They are eligible for these dollars as well.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
That's great. Chris, you mentioned the volume that you've seen come in so far. How does that relate to your previous round? Are you seeing a faster response with this round, or similar? How does that measure?
President Bain, that's a very good question. I would say it's faster. I think the need is certainly there. And I think more people are aware of it this time than they might have been the first time around. And there's been a lot of talk about it. I think I give the credit to the chambers for helping us get the word out. Right. We actually, in the CARES Act dollars, we had 3 different funding rounds, if you remember. We went out 3 different times and opened them for about 2 weeks at a time. And at the end of the 3rd time, we still had a little bit of money left over. And so this time, I think the money will go quickly. I suspect it'll be all allocated. My expectation is by the end of this week, I think we'll be subscribed, but we'll wait and see what happens, because I think they're still coming in, and they're coming in fast, but we're ready, and we're going to make the awards as we get the applications in.
That's terrific.
I will add something too, because it fits here. I had planned to do a postcard mailing to all of our Washington County businesses, which are in Scandia and Forest Lake through the chamber. And so we've noted on that postcard, it's actually going, I was just texting right now with my printer. That'll hit the mailbox, go to the mailboxes tomorrow. There is a note on there that the application's closed and the closing date, or when the funds are no longer available. So that's going to hit every Forest Lake business, not just members, but every Forest Lake business, as well as in Scandia's. So.
Thank you, Nanette. That's very helpful.
Fantastic. Other questions for Chris? That was a really thorough review, and we appreciate the expedited response and the thoroughness. So thank you for being here tonight in the update.
Thank you for the invite, and I'll certainly keep you posted as we move forward.
Perfect. All right. Our next agenda item this evening is the 2021 work plan prioritization and approval. We put approval on the agenda to give the EDA an opportunity to approve the work plan if we felt that it was in, if it were ready for approval. However, if there's items that we want to see reworked or some additional work done on it, certainly happy to entertain that and bring it back at a future meeting. But again, ultimately, we do want EDA approval on the work plan, and want to give that opportunity tonight if you think that we are ready for that. Dan, you want to give us the update? Or walk us through this?
Sure thing. President, members of the EDA, just give me 1 second. I got too many screens open at once on my computer here. To kind of build off of the 2021 work plan, the goal, again, like as President Bain mentioned, is to review and hopefully approve the work plan if you guys feel it's in a state where it can be approved during tonight's meeting. This actually we started working on the work plan, if you recall, back at the December meeting. I did send out the kind of the year-end report from 20, which provided all of the items that were included on the 20 and 21 work plan, as well as status updates on those. So there was a pretty colorful document that went out that had all of the action steps and then updates on each of those steps. That actually was the base document that I used to create this 2021 work plan. And I did include a copy of that in your packet for your review and sort of for you to kind of refer back to as you started thinking about the 2021 work plan. I did end up drafting a new work plan. What ended up happening was, as I started to add and kind of reshift stuff around, the document became kind of unruly. When I started looking at all of the stuff that was there, it just became kind of too much to handle. So I did sort of split off and create a specific 2021 work plan, which is will be discussed this evening. Keep in mind, as we kind of go through this, that these work plans are designed to be flexible documents. They're not we're not laying out all we can work on in 21. They are intentionally designed to be a flexible document to allow for the EDA to react to market and economic conditions. If we recall back into 2020, we approved the work plan in January, and then 3 months later, we're in the midst of a pandemic, which nobody could have predicted, and had kind of shift, prioritization over to responding to COVID. But still, at the end of the year, when you go back to what we accomplished in 20, still we're able to knock off quite a few items on the work plan. So they are flexible documents. So if something that after this meeting, you kind of see, or a project comes forward down the road, we are still able to work on those. This just sort of sets the guideposts for the EDA's 21, what we're going to work on here in 21. The process for tonight is I'll go through the work plan. I'll put the goals up on the screen. There's 5 goals that we approved in 20 for the 2-year work plan. We're not so much discussing the goals, it's more the action steps and kind of the deliverables that are associated with each of those goals. At the end of each of the goals, I'll pause, bring it back to the EDA for comment in discussion, and then make any changes to that particular item before we move on to the next one. At the end of that process, we'll bring it back, and then maybe, hopefully, if we have time, start to prioritize some of that work that's within the work plan. So we can start to say, this is priority 1, this is priority 2 and 3. I did, just for sake of starting a conversation, did kind of go through the plan that is in the packet, and in the memo, there is a draft list to kind of start that conversation. It's by no means final. It's still a fully, editable and changeable document, but I just wanted to provide a starting point for the EDA. And again, as we kind of go through this, bear in mind, this is a draft plan. I did notice today it's kind of going through this. There are a couple of year marks that are still marked as 20 and a couple of grammatical errors that I have to go through and clean up, but it is still in draft, and those will be addressed prior to finalization. So with that, I'll pull up the first goal. So I make sure, is everybody seeing goal 1 on their screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the first goal that we have in the work plan is to support marketing efforts for the city of Forest Lake to promote both the community's assets and the local business community. This goal, when I looked at it from 20 to 21, this probably was one of the more impacted goals due to COVID, since this was a lot of kind of proactive outreach that was here. So a lot of this work was tabled, and I just ended up bringing it forward to 21. But the 2 action steps that were there for 21 would be to evaluate the creation of a convention and visitors bureau for the city of Forest Lake. This was started in 20. We had basically an initial presentation, and then it just got tabled just because of COVID. There was not time to really dive into this. And then the second action step for here would be to continue attending and speaking at the Minnesota Real Estate Journal and MCAR events to promote and market the city. Again, COVID really kind of paused in-person events, and wasn't a lot of work done from the city side in terms of being able to attend or speak at those. So those are the 2 items that I have on here for action steps. And again, to start the conversation, I'll turn it back to the EDA to say, are these still the action steps you want for goal 1, or is there anything additional or changes that you would like to see made to the action steps associated with goal number 1?
Go ahead, Mark.
Just a clarification on the C, what was the initials again? The CV?
CVB.
CVB, yes.
Yeah.
That we're essentially, are we not looking at the chamber taking on that additional role, or is there a new identity that we're going to talk about or possibly recruit?
To your point, Commissioner Finneman, that actually never was finalized last year. I know Nanette and I were working on, that was the original sort of plan for the Convention and Visitors Bureau, was to work out an agreement with the chamber to have them sort of manage the day-to-day operations of it. But again, due to COVID timing, once this got tabled, and I know Nanette had been really busy doing COVID response in 20, so it never got brought back forward. But that was the original plan, was to have this as part of the chambers, or the chamber would manage the CVB on a day-to-day basis for the city.
Yeah, well, that seems logical anyway.
So a follow-up question on that, Nanette. Given the cycle that we've been through with the pandemic and the work, your workflow that's pivoted, do you feel like in 2021 the chamber has the capacity to take on this project?
That's a great question, and I appreciate that, Leif. I think the bigger question is some of the work around this project was with the occupancy tax and with the state of our hotels at this time. I really question the timing of it to start to to push forward an occupancy tax for hotels that are already struggling greatly. So I would say that if we were going to take a look at this, we might be talking about the later part of 2021.
Follow up on that. And I understand where you're coming with that, and I would agree from adding extra burden. Timing is not right for that. But could there be work done in this area, knowing where families are at in the terms? I mean, I think we saw a high level of lake usage. A lot of people are out on their bikes. People are looking for things to do specifically outside. Is there an opportunity to lean into this, for this spring, for 2021, that we could we could position ourselves, at least in some circles, as a great place to come and visit for the day, for the weekend? Even if, is there something we can do, even if we don't have to add extra burden from a cost standpoint on some of those hotels that we're looking to maybe long-term, be a funding source for this project.
Yeah, I think that's a great avenue, and that would be more along the lines of marketing. And so I think that, between the city and the chamber, some work together on getting that out in publications, that would be a much easier route to take, to at least get the ball rolling. So I definitely would entertain a conversation about how we do that for sure.
I think also there's a fair amount of just structure to be worked out, that certainly the sensitivity on timing and impact of a lodging tax is certainly something to consider. But I think there's a fair amount of ground to just be covered before we even get to that spot, that I'd support the continued work so that, when the timing is right, we've got, a work plan agreed, and there's a fair amount of I think definition of responsibility that has to take place between us and the chamber, for example. And so having that groundwork ready I think would be a great accomplishment for 2021. And then we can, pandemic and other considerations that, decide when the right time is for launch. I know if out of that comes some more immediate things that EDA might separately fund, I think that's another great opportunity. I would be happy to consider that. But I think there's a unique opportunity for a program of this nature to have that source of revenue, that I wouldn't want us to stray from that in structure. It just might be that in tactics of how we're funding some near-term things, we might be creative and, use some EDA project dollars or whatever that might look like.
Circling back to your question, I think, Leif, at the beginning, from our bandwidth at the chamber, I think that, again, I tend to be very optimistic, but I do think that we're really in a state of shifting still, just like everyone else. And so if I were to be honest with 2021 and having the bandwidth to take on the scope of the whole project, I think that might be difficult to push it through and to look at all the pieces of it. To start, yes. To finish with a full-on program, that might be difficult. I feel like we're just starting to look at scheduling some of the events that we, our signature events, and just looking to add just a couple of them back in 2021. And so I think we're still very, very fluid in how we proceed. So.
Understandable. Dan, as we're thinking about timing and prioritization on this, maybe we set, timing expectations around that there's some pretty significant dependencies, and we may not get all of the way through planning.
Agreed. And I think there is, to everybody's point, there is a lot of groundwork that needs to be done prior to a CVB being launched. They don't just launch overnight. They are probably, probably at least 3 to 4 months of negotiating out the contracts, getting all the structure in place to start that, authorize the tax and everything like that. So there is quite a bit of groundwork that, if the EDA is still interested in doing a CDB in the future, getting some of that work, in the file, so to speak, where it is ready to go, could still be there, completed in 21.
Question. I have a question as well. I don't know who it is. Did we have full buy-in from the existing hotels back when we first discussed it? I can't remember. I knew there was a little pushback. And then the other question is, did we not also talk about including Columbus and some of the outlying areas, or are we just talking about just Forest Lake?
I can answer that just based on my research. As when we did start this, Dan, whenever we started this, seems like 5 years ago, started having this conversation, which it wasn't 5 years ago because I wasn't here, but that's what 2020 did to us. I know that there was not full buy-in from the hotels. And yes, I believe when we started having this conversation, we were looking at also incorporating Columbus into the conversation. And that was prior to the opening of the hotel at Grand Casino. So that's how long we've been in conversation about this.
And to build off of that, there was also some additional conversations with communities along Highway 8 corridor. A number of years ago, they all passed a kind of a group convention and visitors bureau. They set one up for sort of that region. And I also reached out to them to see if they were willing to partner with, if we ever got one running versus having kind of competing CVBs, can we kind of work under an umbrella? And there was some initial favorability to that. Like they had said, yeah, let's have a conversation about that if you guys get to that point. So there was the ability where if we built one here ourselves of branching out and including, making it a lot larger CVB than just one specifically to Forest Lake.
I think that's all part of what that work plan needs to encompass is the whole, you know, reevaluating and defining that definition of scope, and kind of all of these conversations that have happened over a number of years, bringing that all, updating and bringing that all together. And some probably a fair amount of early on conversations of this board of you know, if we are going to proceed, do we require buy-in of those hotels? Not every community takes that approach, but I think if this body deems that to be an absolute essential, we should identify that soon in the process so that those properties can be engaged, and because of that, and otherwise we're having staff do a lot of work for something that may not move forward. We don't need to decide that tonight, but it's probably something we should, you know, be thinking about sooner rather than later. Judy, go ahead. I believe you had a question.
Does anyone have any inkling as to how many communities take that into consideration, having the buy-in by the local hotels and motels versus just going forward with it? That's one thing. And then I would really prefer to see us move forward with starting that groundwork, because as Danette said, we have been talking about this for a long time. And we are no further along than we were when we started talking about it. So laying that groundwork, doing the paperwork, doing whatever, as well as, you know, making that decision, do we need the buy-in or not?
To that point, I'll just add one more comment before we get some of the answers to what you're asking. Remember that Councilmember Husnick, and remember, council had this on an agenda for final approval. So we had gone through the entire process and had a contract ready to go and a program ready to go. And at the last minute, the hotel owners came forward, and that's kind of what at the last minute kind of, you know, took the energy out of the room, and it was shelved at that point, and we haven't moved it forward since. So in the past was a critical point that we should not underestimate. I don't know the answer. Does anyone on this meeting know the answer or have some thoughts around how communities handle hotel buy-in? And maybe that's just a topic for future discussion as well, but I'll pause and see if anyone has anything specific to that.
Yeah, I can't speak to specifics on how other communities have handled it. You know, my guess would be that they've handled kind of both ways. But as part of a discussion, we can research that and bring that to the table as well, how other communities have handled buy-in from the hotel community.
Yeah, I would add to that, Dan, we do have, you know, it's a common practice to have chambers involved in be part of this process. And so I do have resources to be able to find out what other communities have done. And so I've got those relationships.
Can we also find out, you know, there have to be some statistics out there as the benefit of Visitors Bureau and the marketing that allows us to do for the community, and you know, to really be able to sell it to the local hotels, to really, you know, get them on the bandwagon because of the, you know, if we have some facts that they can back up the value.
Right. Jenny, I think you had something as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm on the chamber and I'm all for it, but I think we have to be sensitive to the hospitality interest in that they're still bleeding, and we can't go out there with this when they've got open wounds and they're going to push back like crazy. I really think we need to visit it like the third or fourth quarter of this coming year of 2021. I just don't. I think if you bring it out now and involve them, they don't even know if they're going to be alive next year.
Sam, go ahead. Oh, and you're on mute.
We did discuss this at the comment.
I think you're on.
Can you still hear me or no?
Now we can.
Got better? I couldn't support it at that time because of the fact that people did come forward. And COVID thing and all that. I agree with the rest of you folks. That this is so if we're going to move ahead with this, we need to figure out funding for this. We're going to go ahead with it.
Sam, you're fading in and out. I think we heard the gist of your comment. And kind of taking all of this feedback into account, rather than moving into some pretty heavy duty administrative thought and some contracting thought with the chamber as a starting spot, perhaps when it's the right time, the starting spot is some more certainly market engagement and feedback, just to test out timing. Because if our hospitality industry perceives this as being anything other than a benefit, why are we doing it? And hospitality is, big. Remember, hospitality is big. It's hotels who administer the tax, but it is also restaurants and other recreational amenities. So it does have broader impact. But if they're not seeing it as right time and a benefit to their businesses, then that, in my mind, should be our guiding principle.
I agree.
Other thoughts as it relates specifically to this particular goal? Dan, I'm not seeing your slide deck anymore, but I think one of the items on your slide deck is also participation in trade shows. Is that right?
Correct. And I was actually going to reference this just briefly because I know Commissioner Erickson had mentioned kind of doing a more locally focused marketing campaign. And I think maybe in the fact that we are sort of in this sort of paused state for the Real Estate Journal and MNCAR events to take place, but there still was a deliverable here of marketing brochures. I think there's a way to maybe create some marketing brochures for the city that could serve a dual purpose of like trying to get people locally encouraged to come out to Forest Lake. But then when those MNCAR events and the Real Estate Journal events resume, we already would have those to move forward. So I think there's an ability here to maybe shift that one just a little bit, focus on the marketing, get those marketing materials, that marketing package put together for the city. And then if we can apply it locally for the first quarter or second quarter of 21, great. And then if those events come back online, say in third and fourth quarter, we'll just pivot them over to there for the remainder of the year.
Dan, I would add on top of that, 2020 for all trade shows and events was a challenge just because it was a surprise. But in my experience, a lot of those venues are now planned full of what does this look like for 2021. So I would just encourage us to look at the audience that we were targeting in those events and finding whether it's the remote sessions or other ways to engage, but try to rather than just saying it's not happening, take it off. I think it's going to look differently, but in my professional life, I'm seeing, those sessions are continuing in some level of remote session. And sometimes people are even more accessible because you're not in you're not on a vendor floor with, 5,000 people if you're in a smaller format. So there still can be quite fruitful.
And
Go ahead, Finn.
if we are reaching for the tourist dollar outside and hoping to bring it here, it doesn't ever feel like Forest Lake's just the exclusive sole place. We are, plus our neighboring communities, offering what we're offering. And so it seems like we need to be a Forest Lake area, Columbus, Wyoming, Scandia kind of story, so that we're talking about all the assets that would draw somebody here.
And I think that's a very valid point, Commissioner Finneman, and that's part of the reason why I have reached out to other communities just to at least explore that option to see if they're favorable to kind of doing, you know, an area wide. Like I look at it from when I go on vacation, I like to look at a whole area, not necessarily one particular city. So I think if we can broaden that scope a little bit to try to get some, you know, either co-branding or co-marketing materials together, I think it's going to help, you know, get all ships raised by that rising tide. So I can definitely continue kind of some of that outreach to see what I can find, or see if I can't find some partnerships in other communities that are willing to come in on their sort of tourism marketing dollars for 21.
Makes sense. In this share view, I'm not seeing everybody. So if anyone's got their hand up or wants to jump in, please just do so. Any other feedback points related to goal 1 before we move on? This has been a good discussion. I'm not hearing anybody. Dan, let's go on to the next.
All right. Goal number 2, this is one, promote downtown revitalization. The main goal in here from last year was to establish a downtown committee. As we all know, we've established a downtown committee. They're meeting regularly now. What's being recommended here for the action step was to complete the downtown planning process. So here the EDA and the downtown committee will hire a planning consultant and work with that consultant on the completion of a downtown plan for the city of Forest Lake. As part of that planning process, also including a market review of the draft plan so we can allow for market feedback on there is being recommended. The deliverable here would be the downtown planning document. And then cost for this one would be are still to be determined. I'm still waiting to hear back from all the different planning firms as to what their planning costs are going to be. The second action step for this one is a continuation of the downtown business incentive program. If you recall, that's the $5,000 or up to $5,000 tax abatement for exterior renovation works that take place in the MU1 or MU2 zoning districts. I do have a italics line at the bottom here. I do have this one also considered in as part of goal number 5, which is sort of a broader conversation about all of the incentive programs that the city currently offers to encourage development. But at this point, recommendation is to kind of continue on that program for 21 while that larger policy discussions are taking place at the same time. So those are the 2 for goal number 2. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the EDA.
Thank you, Dan. What questions do we have? Comments related to goal 2?
I'll just jump in then.
Go ahead, please.
In terms of reviewing the policies, we talk about, you know, the incentive programs, some tax abatement, the business subsidy, and the TIF program. At some point, I'd like to see the written policies. I know some of the state policies and others that we follow, but I'd like to see some of those written policies so we can see exactly how far we can take, for example, a TIF program if we understand it better and know how we can apply it, what the limits might be. So if we have those policies somehow in a written form, it can be e-transferred to us. I'd like to be able to read through those and see if in fact there are lots of inventive ways we can apply that.
Great point. Mark, I would just add to that I would welcome the opportunity for even just a basic EDA member education session. So, you know, certainly send us the information in advance or send it to us in advance, but an education session just to work through some of that to review, I would find helpful. And it sounds like others may as well.
I'd vote for that idea. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I'll go into that a little bit in further detail when I get to goal number 5, because that is one of the first item on the goal number 5's action step is a review of that. And I'll go into a little bit more detail when we get to that goal.
Agree. You know, we hear feedback. So I hear feedback routinely that, and I think I have just a general perception that this program is underutilized. I hear feedback that it is, you know, we've got a couple of classic textbook examples in downtown where would hope something that a program we could offer would provide assistance, and we just haven't been able to crack the nut there. And so, but I also know that we have some limitations on, you know, the type of assistance we're able to provide. And so if, you know, looking for ways for expansion, I think would be certainly a worthwhile exercise. And frankly, that might just start with a little bit more EDA member education on what we are and aren't able to do. Any other feedback points around goal number 2? All right, Dan, let's move on to goal 3.
All right, goal number 3. This goal is to actively market and promote the city-owned land to attract new commercial development within the city. This is broken down into 2 action steps. The first action step is to continue to support the efforts of the Minnesota Technology Corridor by actively marketing the Headwaters 123 acres as a premier property within the corridor. And the second step here is to partner with the Washington County CDA and attend real estate and development trade shows and work to establish a contact list within the commercial real estate market. These 2 action steps were carried over from last year's work plan. So these were on the plan from 20. I just moved them forward into 21. There was an action step in here to actively market the airport business park as well. But we have sold 2 of those parcels off. So I put the focus on sort of more general city marketing here for this item. But these are the 2 action steps for goal number 3. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the EDA for conversation.
Members of the EDA, questions, comments on this one? I'll jump in just to ask Dan. So I appreciate having the Minnesota Technology Corridor as a continued action item. Could we get a member of the Technology Corridor to just give come on a future meeting and give the EDA an update? There's always a lot of activity that's happening that we aren't seeing, or I'm assuming there's activity that's happening that we're not seeing. That just kind of gives some indication of corridor successes or challenges. It'd be good for us to see, short of course, you know, having, you know, the next big opportunity land in our laps. Be good just to hear a progress update.
I will get that scheduled.
Are the 2 lots that have been sold, are those deals totally done?
Yes, well, council approved. Did we actually close, Patrick? So council approved the purchase agreement with Team Vantage the last December 14th, which was our last city council meeting. I'm not sure if we've actually closed on that.
No, they're still doing some environmental testing and their due diligence. We would expect to close by close to the beginning of February or the first week in February.
And did Team Vantage buy both of them?
Yes.
They'll continue to occupy their present building, but build future business on the next 2 sites.
Yeah, it's the custom mold building on the west side of town that they're outgrown. And so they will be moving their custom mold and design from the west side of town to that location. And he will determine what he's going to do with the building. If he sell it, lease it, or I'm not sure he knows what he's going to do yet.
Okay.
That's the property on Everton, if everyone's
Correct.
familiar with, yeah. Other feedback for goal number 3? Not hearing any. Dan, let's move on to goal 4.
All right. Goal number 4 is to support workforce development. And I'll allude to this when I give the BR&E update, but this actually was the #1 challenge that was identified from local businesses was employee attraction and retention. So this is a very timely goal for the EDA to focus on. here in 21. These action steps were actually carried over from 20 into 21. So these were on the existing work plan. But the first one is to work with local area businesses whenever possible to learn about their challenges in finding and retaining talent, and then make the connections with workforce development and training providers, educators, and others to identify opportunities to address these channels or these challenges. Basically here, the kind of the goal of this action step is to start to establish the EDA as a conduit, to start to partner the businesses with those that are developing the workforce to make sure that they're aware that each other's exist, and just to look for those areas where we can serve as sort of put the right people in the room at the right time to have those conversations so we can support local workforce development. The second action step here is to continue to support the efforts of the Forest Lake School District's Career Launch Program. This has been ongoing. I have been attending their remote meetings throughout 20. The recommendation here would be to continue to do that in 21. And then also, as part of that would be to invite them to invite the high school career launch leaders to attend a future EDA meeting to learn more about what their program offers to both local and expanding businesses. During that meeting, we also would expand that invite to members of the Chamber of Commerce as well, so they could attend and hear all about the career launch program. The third action step here would be to collect and analyze data specific to the City of Forest Lake's workforce, include information on workforce skills, education levels of our commuting residents, what are the available talent and development programs that we have, assemble that up into a workforce report that we can then provide to local businesses or businesses that are looking to expand here into Forest Lake. There has been some initial conversations at the Washington County CDA about doing a Washington County wide workforce study. If that does come to fruition, we'd look to partner with them to sort of see what that first level of data looks like. And if we need additional, workforce studies, we could, potentially do our own. But right now, is keeping it on there just so that an opportunity does come up for us to do a workforce study. That is why this one is on the work plan for 21. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the EDA.
Thoughts on this item? I guess I have more, so I agree with the overall goal and work plan items. I think the question that I always come back to on this topic is, how does the EDA supplement what's already happening? Like, what's our, other than being a cheerleader and an advocate and communication, what can we tactically do to support? The school district's got a very strong program here. The county has strong programming. And clearly it's a business need. So how do we best complement the work that's already being done, or expand, or kind of what's our work track that is helpful? I think if we could define a more specific work plan, I'm not sure what that looks like, but I think some more specificity would be helpful in this area. It feels vague, and I think it's vague because it's important, but it's also highly covered by other partner areas. And frankly, maybe some of that is around the second action step. This is me just thinking out loud, but around, data points. And, we certainly have some ability to survey and understand workforce as we are an exporter of workforce. And maybe some of that information to our businesses of, here's the workforce that's available to you today, but they're leaving the city daily. Maybe some of that information is helpful, and where we have a role.
I think one thing to kind of build off of too is that, with this item, and I agree, this is a vaguer, these action items are pretty vague. But I think with the BR&E surveys that were done, that was sort of a first step in getting the EDA out back into the business community to start to reestablish those connections. So I think continuing at that work to make those connections between the EDA and the business community stronger. So when we hear their challenges in talent identification and retraction and attention, or retaining talent, we could potentially get them to partner with the career launch program to look for that. And I think it is one of those things where this is probably the one where we may end up having to live with a little bit vaguer action steps, because it is, we're not resourced right now to do our own, workforce development program here at the EDA. We're going to have to try to partner with somebody who already has one in place. But if we can be sort of that conduit to get businesses in touch with those programs, because I hear a lot of times businesses don't know that those programs are out there. I think that may be a success point for this particular item, is saying, we can connect a potential employer with a potential employee, and that could be the success story for supporting workforce development within the city of Forest Lake.
Other thoughts, comments on this one?
It's a thought that keeps rolling around my mind when you talk about vagueness of action steps. Is that I just wonder if that vagueness doesn't stem from the vagueness of the goal itself.
Yeah.
I mean, is it possible to make a smarter goal as it relates to workforce development that might actually drive some more tactical steps?
That is a really good point, because our goal, this is probably the vaguest goal we have.
Yeah.
Dan, do you want to give that some thought and think about how we might define that further? And
yeah, I can noodle on that a little bit and bring back a little bit more probably specific, we can revisit the goal and, maybe drill down those action steps a little bit more on the deliverable side. And they're not necessarily in that 20,000 foot level where they're currently lying right now.
I will also say, I do like the portfolio approach here. So certainly there are areas on this work plan where we are the only entity, or one of the only entities that's doing active work. And then there's other areas where we're partnering with other entities. And so some we are in the driver's seat and should be very, very specific. And I'm okay with us being in the support role, but defining further what that looks like, I think would be helpful.
Just Tamar, to your point about having other agencies doing a great job of this, maybe this is something that we can, maybe there's another goal. I can't remember the other things that came up to the top of different things, but maybe this is still something we want to focus on or support, but maybe it's not one of our top 5 goals if that's what we can't find something that's real specific.
Also, keep on the table the power of a monetary contribution, right? So if our contribution is we are providing, some sort of incentive, or we're providing, funds for somebody else to do great programming, maybe that is the extent. Chris, go ahead.
President Band, members, just in hindsight, when we created that goal a year ago, it was next to impossible to find employees. Every business was struggling to get people in the door, and that's changed as a result of COVID. And I think the change is going to continue. My biggest concern is I don't honestly know what the change is going to be. Will we have more people who are not driving to the Twin Cities and more working remotely? And what opportunities does that bring to us for our existing employers or existing businesses that do have the opportunity to grow, because now there's a more captive audience of workers that are not willing to drive an hour a day to get to work, and then jump into a lobby in an elevator with a whole bunch of people. And so I think the thing that Dan talked a little bit about with perhaps once we get into the summer months a little bit, and maybe the vaccine and other things are a little bit more normal again, maybe we do that workforce study and find out what the changes are, and use that as a way to recruit new companies that are looking at expanding and can't find employees where they're at. So just to kind of keep that, I want to, put it in perspective. I think that a lot has changed since last March, and now, and then you probably hear this from some of your members as well. It's hard to get companies are having a hard time getting people back to work again because, for a lot of different reasons. So I think the workforce piece does have a component, and maybe the best thing we can do right now is to just keep it on our radar and do some planning as we move forward. Just some thoughts.
Jenny, go ahead.
Pertaining to the conversation you and I had earlier, maybe the EDA could do a presentation to employers about thinking outside the box, alternatives in hiring, and
Or just
informative.
recruitment, recruitment and retention, trends and what's working. What does that even look like in 2020, 2021? Yeah. Nanette, go ahead.
Can I just make mention that
Please.
that I do get a fair amount of information. We have a couple of our members are staffing agencies, and so they have access to that kind of information regularly. And so that comes across my desk. And so if that's something helpful for the members of the EDA to see, I'm certain that we can pull some of that together.
Maybe we even just start with we're the connection point for some of those chamber members that have that information and some of our members who need it. And it's just a sponsored webinar education, because I think just connecting those who need the information with those who have it, that might be part of our role.
And to be fair, we have done that. But I think that was probably, Chris, help me think of that. That was probably earlier on. That was maybe May, June that we offered that. So things are a whole lot different. And so, we could look at that from a Washington County Chamber Coalition offering as well and take it bigger. Because that is across the board. We're hearing that all over. It's just the changes and getting people to come back and it's all based on the fact that what we see coming down from the various from CARES Act and whatnot, it has an effect on people's willingness to work or whatever. So I definitely think we know it's a need. So how to fill that need and get the information in the right hands, I guess, is kind of been an ongoing process. So I think it's definitely worth a conversation to continue to have that.
That's good. Anything further on this before we move on to our last goal? Doing a quick time check. We're at 6:38. Dan, let's talk about the next goal and make sure we've got enough time for our other agenda items this evening.
Goal number 5, this is the goal to identify barriers to development, redevelopment within the city, and look for proactive solutions to reduce or eliminate these barriers. This is where I put the review of the current tax abatement, business subsidy, and TIF programs and update these policies as needed. Historically, I think the city's acted more in a reactionary position when it comes to doing these type of TIF programs, business subsidies, and tax abatements. And I think kind of putting a policy or program together where we can be more proactive. If a developer comes in, what are your policies? We can show them the portfolio of our current policies and programs. This is, in full disclosure, this is going to be a pretty lengthy review. These aren't, necessarily something that you can attain or get done in one meeting. These are going to be this is a lot of work in this particular item here. But I think it's important work for the EDA to establish a good policy review of where we currently are with all of our different policy options or incentive options. The second action step here, identify infrastructure line of 61 corridor in need of aesthetic improvement or maintenance, light poles, telephone poles, etc., and develop an estimate for required work. I think some of this action step will roll up in the downtown plan. I think some of this will be over, there'll be a little bit of overlap with the downtown plan. So I think this will be kind of accomplished through the downtown planning process. And then the third step here, this was a carryover from 20. I moved it in into 21. Washington County had been considering a revolving loan program for small businesses. And we just had this on our work plan. So if that program did come to fruition, we'd look at exploring supporting that program through a matching revolving loan fund program designed for business expansion and commercial building improvements. As far as I know, last time I spoke with Chris, that program is on hold at the county due to COVID impacts. It's in the holding pattern. But I wanted to keep this on our work plan in case that comes out of the holding pattern at the county level. We'd at least be aware that that is a, was a possibility in 20, and I wanted to move it forward to 21.
Thank you, Dan.
Sorry, I forgot I was sharing my screen there. So this whole
Okay.
double screen share, I got a little confused there.
When we talk about aesthetic improvements of the 61 corridor, let's include both city, we've got light poles and utility items, and then there's even things like landscaping, and some of those right of ways at times can be a bit rough. And I would look for us to tackle both big topics and little topics, big items, expensive items, as well as some of the other less, like things that shouldn't be as expensive, like pulling some weeds. Other items here.
Just follow up on that real quick. I don't know, most of you might have noticed that it looked like it was pretty horrific crash that took out the light pole at 11th there. And they have a temporary pole there. And then maybe this question for Ryan, but is there any opportunity there to fast forward something if they're going to replace that to make it all match, or do some kind of a galvanized or something other than the rusted out yellow, the current poles?
Where are you talking about?
11th and 61 over the weekend, someone took out one of the large stoplights, and then they put a wood pole in there.
I would have to inquire about that, but with the planned project, I doubt anything brand new, significantly improvement, just an individual improvement would come forward at this time.
Ryan, go ahead.
Through that area, you're going to have a significant amount of private utility relocation from 61 to Forest Road too. So anything you do put in now is going to get redug up with that project. The county is planning on, was originally 25, but I think it'll be a 26 construction now, but the project design will start in 24. I'll follow up though with the county and MnDOT.
There's one of the challenges with those road improvements, 24 or 25 moving to 26 feels like it's light years away. And in terms of planning for road construction projects, it's actually more closer to tomorrow. So I struggle with those timelines too, but it's more in the near term, and the earlier years are pretty baked in. So there's not a lot of movement once you get beyond, or to do anything sooner.
So with both county projects, the timelines, obviously are long, but the amount of right-of-way process they have to go through alone, that's a year right there and everything. And if they don't close the deal on something, then, you can't get too far ahead of the project. So you work their projects in stages, and they have standards they want to fulfill on their corridors. And it obviously is a lot less out there today than what those standards are from the county's perspective. So they have to work through a process that they have developed internally. And also because of the type of impact these projects play, the public outreach is a whole nother portion of these projects that takes another year just to ramp up to what we're going to see next Tuesday at our city council workshop. Another presentation from the county on Everton Avenue or County State Aid Highway 33.
Any other comments on this last goal? I want to make sure we've got room for our remaining agenda items, and we probably need to adjourn this by about 6:55 to get fully transitioned over to our council meeting. All right, so thoughts on approval tonight, or would we like to see some additional updates brought back for approval? My preference would be for the latter, just in terms of time here, but if anyone's got some burning desire to approve and call it good, I'm happy to entertain that as well.
I say we defer.
Yes, some additional refinement. Dan, do you feel like you've got what's needed for feedback on additional refinement?
Yeah, I have enough to, yeah, I think I can take down or narrow down the scope for the ones that had additional questions and bring this back at the next meeting for prioritization and approval at the next meeting.
Very good. With that being the case, let's move on to our next agenda item. I am missing my agenda here. Our next agenda item, which is the BRNE survey update. And Dan, could we keep that? We don't have any action items considered for that this evening, so maybe can you keep that brief and high level so we have enough time for a city update afterwards?
Yep, absolutely. In the interest of time, I just wanted to give everybody on the EDA an update as to where we are at the BRNE. I did not want this falling off radar screen. We did complete 30 surveys for the BRNE. So we had approximately a 50% or 48% response rate, which is really good for this type of program. Comparing that back to 2012 or 2011, we had a 36%. So we're quite a bit higher this time around. When I looked at the data initially, one of the goals was to kind of capture that COVID impact. And I do feel that we did kind of encapsulate that in the data set. What'll happen now is that I'm starting to work on the data analysis portion of it, taking the survey data back from SurveyMonkey and compiling that into a format that I can present to the EDA. I will compile the survey results as well as a report and bring that forward at a future EDA meeting. I am shooting right now for February, but may have to delay that back to March, just kind of depending upon how long that analysis portion takes. But just wanted the EDA to be aware that that work is being completed right now and look for the report forthcoming.
Very good. Any questions for Dan on that? All right, not seeing any. Let's move on to a city update. Dan, Patrick, do two of you want to tag team?
Yeah, I'll just quickly ask there at the beginning of the meeting, there was a question regarding the COVID CARES Act funds, and the Castlewood Golf Course funds have not been reallocated. We have asked the state, based on new federal legislation, that extend the deadline for spending those funds until January 31st of 2021. We've asked the state if there's a possibility for an extension for those funds so that we can reallocate them. We're waiting a response for that. However, the legislation did only apply to the states. So I'm not sure what those chances are, but at least we're asking, we're trying to see if we can take the remaining $150 approximately $1,000 and reallocate it to a different use. I think the other question was regarding a Castlewood Golf Course and Max, and we are working on submitting him a proposal. Some of his requests for some kind of an agreement had to do with operations of the golf course, and before we commit to that, we just talked to our operator to see what impact those requests have. So we anticipate forwarding some kind of at least initial proposal next week.
Other questions? Any other city updates?
Just if I can, a couple questions on that.
Mike, go ahead.
Is the plan then where is the plan at? Is the plan to move forward with that same structure that was purchased and use dollars in the city budget to continue, or are looking at a plan B where try to retrofit the existing clubhouse or sales area? Where's the city at with this right now? Because
if I was asked for recommendation, I would say we would move forward with that structure. To be quite honest with you, I know there's been some disagreement on what size that structure is, but it's relatively small. And we'd rather have a place where we could have more space to operate and to run a golf business like we should. So the council asked for my recommendation, that's what it'll be.
And so then that's upwards of 300,000 out of the budget to
I don't know where you got that figure. No, not
well, it was 150 for CARES money, and I think there was budgeted for another 100 to do the build out. So that's
incorrect. was 150,000.
That was everything, the build out, the complete finished
Yeah, there may have been a one other bill
sewer,
for
the net
electricity, but
39,000 in the sewer fund, all that, that's 150 total.
it's 150.
Okay. That's not what I recall reading, but I'll look into it.
All right, other items that related to city update, and it kind of came up earlier in our discussion, and just confirmation. I think Councilmember Hustek and I had dropped off at this point of the last December meeting, but I think you were given an update of the pending purchase agreement for the 2 parcels at the Airport Business Park, and we covered earlier that those were approved, and we are in final closing for that. So exciting to see that move forward. And certainly a cash transaction that did not have additional city subsidy requested. So it was, in my mind, a success for the city, and happy to start to recover some of the investment that we had done at that Airport Business Park. So
I also have just a few activities that came out of the Planning Commission. Donovan forwarded me a list of upcoming projects. One of them is 120 apartment units in 2 buildings on Timber Ridge 2 on Everton Avenue. There's a 35 lot residential subdivision that's being considered 120 or so lot residential subdivision at the western edge of Headwaters, and then an 18 lot build out of single family homes in Headwaters 12th edition. So Donovan's going to continually forward sort of development update, to me, so we can get that to the EDA on a monthly basis. You'll probably see these lists not change a whole lot from a month-to-month basis, since these projects take a while to get through all the full planning process, but we'll keep the EDA aware of what is happening from a development perspective. We'll do a better job of that in 21, so EDA is more informed on development within the city.
all right. We'll conclude city update. Chris, Washington County update. Anything further for us this evening?
Thank you, President Banning and members. I don't have anything in addition to my earlier report, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Chris this evening? All right. Thanks again for all of the information, Chris, and all of the work that you're doing here in Forest Lake.
Thank you.
Nanette, update for us this evening?
Certainly, President Bain, members of the EDA. I had a couple of things I wanted to share with you. First and foremost, we have been working fast and furious with Washington County, actually Anoka County and Chisago County to some degree, but mostly Washington County, and co-hosting meetings and getting the information out. So again, just doing a lot on the groundwork to make sure that our businesses know about what we call the FAST grant program through the county. I do also want to mention that some weeks ago, we put together, this has been on my mind since before COVID, but I wanted to do some sort of growth task force. And so with where we are in COVID recovery, I decided to start gathering with local business owners. It's more of a business to business forum. We have a business person who is facilitating, and I'm there for education and basically to glean from what they share. But we have a recovery, growth, and revitalization task force, and we've been meeting. And interestingly enough, you talked about the weeds in the, that's one of the things that came up. And so right now, primarily this group is Forest Lake business owners, not by design, but that's just how it's kind of shaken out right now. I will tell you that it's interesting how many of the topics that come up are really related to partnerships with the EDA or the city of Forest Lake. Where we're at right now is we've been meeting and having great conversation. And so what I'd like to do, we'll be meeting to prioritize those things because there's pages at this point. And so I'd like to get that prioritization completed, and then we'll bring that back to the members, to you, the members of the EDA, so that you can glean from that information as well. My hope is that perhaps some of these folks will also join in the downtown revitalization meetings that we're having so that we have more businesses taking part in that. One of the things that came out of this, just really, we felt it was a low hanging fruit, was the possibility of some sort of, whether it's something to drive folks, our community down to lakeside area. And so whether that's, ice, just a sheet of ice down there or whatever, that's really what it started out as, is could we have ice, so that people would come downtown, maybe stop at Vanilli's or one of the other restaurants, do a little shopping. And so from that conversation, I've been in touch with city staff, and we've just briefly started conversation around the possibility of some sort of a winter, we won't call it a festival, but some sort of an event, right? Low key, not Flake Fest, to the degree of that, but something that we could do a good job of here in the weeks ahead, just to start to get people to move about. It would be very safe, making sure that we have spread out activities, potentially possibly using the lake as well. And so that conversation has just started. And in fact, I'm still in conversation with my board to make sure that allocation of time is okay. Thus far, who I've heard from, it's been favorable. So that's really just all transpired in less than a week. And so I think that could be something really good for for not only the community, but the businesses as well. And then lastly, as I mentioned, looking very forward to the prospect of potentially having things like our golf tournament again and the Lakes Area Expo. There's no doubt about it. We will not host the Lakes Area Expo, which is typically in March. We're looking at doing that in the fall. And so, so just getting some sort of normalcy back on the calendar, potentially, possibly, hopefully. So those are the primary things that I wanted to share with you all today.
That's great. Thank you for the update. And I get something from the chamber almost daily. You guys are working really hard and doing a great job of getting information out and business support. So thank you. Any questions for Nanette? All right. We are at the end of our planned agenda for this evening. And so if there is nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion from council or from member Huntosh. Is there a second?
Second.
And a second from member Erickson. And Karen, could we get a roll call vote for adjournment?
Member Roberts?
Aye.
Member Huntosh?
Aye.
Member Husnick? Member Finneman?
Aye.
Member Lorge? Member Lorge, you're on mute.